progress. And then jumping back over to the defensive side of the ball, as I mentioned, Kyle Kennard certainly speaks for himself with his 5.5 sacks. But Gilbert Edmond, while he's not gotten a sack so far, has been pretty good at pressuring the quarterback. I think back to the LSU game a couple weeks ago, he was one of the many guys that was in Garrett Nussmeier's face quite a bit over the course of that game, making him uncomfortable, forcing him in to making some ill-advised throws and and all that. So he's brought good pressure when he has been out there on the field so far. Look at DeAndre Jules and Monkel Goodwine on the interior of the defensive line. Now, they've not gotten as many snaps as some of the other guys on defense, some of the other guys on the defensive line that have obviously been here before, like Tonka and Boogie and Barrett and all those guys. But when they've been out there on the field, they've done a pretty good job in the limited time that they've seen snaps. I think about DeAndre Jules and some of the, stops he's made, like in the run game and stuff like that. You definitely notice his presence. And Monkel Goodwine to a lesser degree. You certainly see the potential of him as well. And we saw a lot of what he's capable of, like back in the spring game. And all that. So he's somebody that, again, when he gets out on the field, does make his presence known at times, which is certainly a positive. If you look at the linebacker core as well, Demetrius Knight, Bengali Kamara, and more Demetrius Knight because he's factored in as one of the true starters in that linebacker room. And obviously sideline guys made some big plays, some tackles for losses, was somebody that a lot of us were excited about during the offseason. And Bengali Kamara, who has not gotten on the field quite as much, but has made some plays when he's been out there as well. So I bring all this up to kind of run through all those specific transfers to say that, this past offseason's transfer class, I think, is looked at as a pretty good success so far. Now, again, we're only a third of the way through the season. There's still a lot more of this story to be written for this team, but the optimism is that it's going to continue to get even better for all these guys that have made an impact so far through the first handful of games. So, again, for the offseason, for what Carolina did, which it really needed to do, was make an impact in the transfer portal. I think it's certainly done that, and a lot of these guys have made significant impacts through these first couple of games. Speaking of the transfer portal, the conversation around quarterbacks is an interesting one because there's a couple schools around the country right now that are getting burned a little bit by moving on from their quarterbacks that had been there for a couple years and wagering all their chips on younger guys that had not quite proven themselves. We'll get to that conversation coming up next. Reminder, it is Wednesday, and because it is bye week, we have Carolina calls tonight, but Lamont Paris on instead of Coach Beamer. That'll be at 6 o'clock right here on the game with Lamont Paris and Derek Scott, which you can listen to in Columbia and Myrtle Beach as well. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday morning. Dive into some quarterbacks coming up next here on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. Making our way through the bye week, so giving us a chance to kind of focus on some things that are going on around the SEC and around all of college football while Carolina is idle this upcoming Saturday. And one story that's been pretty big this week revolves around what's happening out in Oklahoma as Jackson Arnold, who was benched in the middle of the game against Tennessee this past weekend for poor performance, is once again going to be on the bench this weekend as Oklahoma takes on Auburn as he was not named, or excuse me, he has been now moved to the second spot on the quarterback list for Oklahoma for this upcoming weekend. And it's an interesting story because there was basically all the eggs put in the Jackson Arnold basket this offseason after Dillon Gabriel left Oklahoma to go to Oregon. And yesterday, Brent Venables, in talking to the media, was asked about Dillon Gabriel's exit from Oklahoma and how all that went down for eventually, settling on Jackson Arnold being their guy this year and going forward. Here's what Brent Venables said yesterday when talking to the media. Cut number 10 here, Terry.
With the circumstances of the Coach Levy leaving and thought he wanted to get closer to home, to Hawaii. And so I was like, I didn't know I had to fight this fight. I didn't realize that you were even considering coming back. And he says, yeah, but I just really want to, get closer to home. So that's, again, we hugged and shook hands, and he was a little emotional, and I was, but it was all really good and positive. You make a guy stay. You guys trying to, find the next thing, the next chapter for him. I'm sure there was probably some disappointment that, that he wasn't more highly thought of in the NFL. Had an amazing year and is a fantastic quarterback. And with nobody running nobody off or things like that.
Of course, Brent Venables is not going to say that they told Dillon Gabriel, yeah, we don't want you here anymore. But it was one of those things where when Dillon Gabriel decided to leave and go to Oregon, and what he's referencing there is the fact that his NFL draft grade was pretty low. I think they were projecting him to be like a 7th-round pick, which, of course, is not something you want to leave college for because there's no guarantees when you were a 7th-round pick for even going to make a team. So he had the option to come back to come back to Oklahoma or try his hand somewhere else. He decided to go to Oregon, and essentially nobody in Oklahoma was panicking about that, right? Like Gabriel was a very good quarterback for Oklahoma, but everybody was looking at what you had in Jackson Arnold as the future of that program. And you could either say, okay, we got Dillon Gabriel for another year and potentially run off Jackson Arnold, or we go ahead and flip the switch now, let Jackson Arnold take over as a redshirt freshman and lead us for the next 3 to 4 years, however long he ends up playing more college football. And hindsight is now 2020, of course, and you would say, okay, well, they lost on that exchange because Dillon Gabriel is quarterbacking a college football playoff contender, and Jackson Arnold was just benched for Michael Hawkins Jr. for this upcoming weekend's game against Auburn. But that being said, and David Ubben of The Athletic wrote a pretty good article about this the other day in reference to this situation. That doesn't necessarily mean that this trend of going to the younger guy is suddenly going to go away. He also references in his article not only the situation in Oklahoma, but also what's gone on at Kansas State. If you remember, Will Howard was Kansas State's quarterback, led them to that Big 12 championship a couple years ago where they beat TCU. And this past offseason, he decided he was going to go elsewhere, which landed him eventually at Ohio State. And everybody at Kansas State is like, that's cool with us because we have this kid in Avery Johnson that is going to be the future and the superstar of this program. Avery Johnson's played okay through his first couple games, didn't play as great this past weekend against BYU, where Kansas State got drug pretty hard in that game. I believe 38-9 was the final score in that one. So Avery Johnson hasn't quite lived up to what people thought he was, going to be. and he's not quite as fleshed out as a passer as I think many hoped he was going to be compared to what Will Howard has done so far this season at Ohio State. And, you know, for every Jackson Arnold or Avery Johnson, there is Dylan Raiola, you know, coming as a true freshman who makes an immediate impact and looks like the superstar that he was built to be. Now, it's a little bit different because Nebraska didn't have, you know, a superstar quarterback or a high-level quarterback that they were pushing out in favor of bringing Dylan Raiola in. But I bring this up because in today's world of college football, there's also the NIL aspect of this as well, as far as, you know, deciding what kind of program you're going to be, whether that be, you know, go out in the transfer portal and get somebody or develop a guy out of high school and let him be your quarterback for, you know, 3 or 4 years. Because, and I think about this from the Oklahoma perspective, the NIL situation out there is good, and Jackson Arnold garnered a lot of NIL money coming out of high school as a highly touted prospect, right? And it comes to a point where if your NIL is paying a lot of money for your backup quarterback, eventually you're going to have to say, okay, well, we need this guy to get on the field or we can't justify paying him what we're paying him. And if they're not paying him what he thinks he should be paid, well, guess what? He's going to go somewhere else. So it comes to that conundrum of, okay, we have a decision to make. Do we want to continue with Dylan Gabriel for one more year and, you know, risk losing Jackson Arnold? Or do we go ahead and make the switch now and let Jackson Arnold go out there and play for the amount of money that he is being paid up to this point in time? I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm just saying that's where we're at currently with this model of college football. And trust me, I will get to the Matt Sluka situation here in just a little bit. That was crazy news that broke overnight. And I bring all this up, and I know there's a lot of information I threw at you, because I think at some point, programs have to decide what they're going to be. Are you going to be a program that develops quarterbacks out of high school? Or are you going to be one that just goes to the transfer portal every couple of years and gets the best guy available to lead your program until you go out and need another one? And there's no right or wrong answer to that. We've seen success with both. We've seen transfer quarterbacks win national championships. We've seen developed quarterbacks win national championships. So one doesn't necessarily outweigh the other, but I think we're getting to a point now where you can't straddle the line, right? Like, you have to decide what you're going to be. You're either going to be committed to developing high school talent, or you're just going to be a program that goes out and repeatedly gets guys from the transfer portal. Southern Cal was one of those programs up until this past year with Miller Moss that has just repeatedly gone out with transfer portal guys, or at least Lincoln Riley specifically, going back to his time in Oklahoma, has been a heavy transfer portal guy. Where it's like, all right, I'm just going to go out there and find the best level quarterback, plug him into my system, and we're going to go win Heisman trophies, and, you know, they're going to go off and be the number one pick. This year was the anomaly with Miller Moss, who, you know, was waiting behind Caleb Williams, but didn't mean Lincoln Riley didn't go out there and try, because that's the identity of what he does as a coach. Flip side, South Carolina, and I know you had Spencer Rattler here as a you know, the stopgap for a couple of years, but he was brought in with, you know, no real other prospects in the quarterback room that were going to challenge him for that starting role. But as Spencer Rattler was getting ready to be phased out, you had Lenore Sellers, who you've put your chips in now as your starter for the foreseeable future. Yeah, you brought in Robbie Ashford to compete, but that's a different situation because he was not thought of as a high-level quarterback coming in here. He was just more or less a guy with a similar skill set to complement what you already had with Lenore Sellers. And again, with today's model of college football, with NIL being the way that it is, and again, I'll get to the Sluka thing here in just a little bit, you have to decide what you're going to be. Develop quarterbacks or go out there and get somebody in the transfer portal. And it's not an easy decision. Again, you can go either way and be successful either way. But I feel like, again, straddling this line like we've seen some of these programs do doesn't always prove to be the best thing for you, and you have to make tough decisions at some point. More on the Sluka situation coming up here in just a little bit, but it is Wednesday, and that means we do talk racing with Jen Jensen. We'll do that coming up next as we recap what happened at Bristol Motor Speedway on Saturday night in the first round of eliminations for NASCAR's Cup Series playoffs. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday here on The Game. Tyler Head here. I love telling you about Twin Peaks, especially this time of year. There is so much football on television, Monday nights, Thursday nights, Friday nights, Saturdays with college, Sundays with the pros, and really never a bad time to be out at Twin Peaks. But it doesn't just have to be for watching sporting events. Why wait for the weekend? They are serving scratch food and pouring quality cocktails every day after dark. You can come by the lodge and experience the best late night in the league today, tomorrow, or any other day of the week. In fact, if you're looking for a job where you can have a lot of fun and make great money, Twin Peaks is the team for you. They're looking for Twin Peaks girls, cooks, bussers, barbacks, and more. If you want to work for Twin Peaks, text work the number 4TP to 85000. Again, work the number 4TP to 85000 to be a part of the Twin Peaks team.
Just recently on the radio, he said to Cliff Daniels, I'm trying to get to the white flag as quickly as I can. Well, that white flag has come. And Kyle Larson is on his way home. It has been a stellar first-class performance under the lights in Bristol. Kyle Larson is the man.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Points out ahead along with you on your Wednesday here on the game. It is time to talk some NASCAR, and this is a part of our Laying the Wood segment brought to you by our friends over at Georgia Pacific, as Jen Jensen from the early game joins me now. And I think it goes without saying, Kyle Larson took the field to the woodshed on Saturday night, leading 462 of 500 laps in the Bristol night race.
I mean, but he didn't. There's 38 laps he didn't lead. So, I mean, what was he doing?
Unacceptable.
Very unacceptable.
Not even close to perfect.
No, I don't know. I was kind of disappointed in that, but yeah, he did take him to the woodshed big time.
Completely dominant. Look, he's very good at Bristol. Won the night race there a couple years ago. Started up front, and once he got past Alex Bowman a few laps into the race, it was pretty much on from there. And in today's world of NASCAR, there is so much parity. We don't see this kind of dominance a lot. I mean, Truex Jr. led almost every lap of the Coke 600 back in 2016, but rarely do we see a butt kicking like we saw on Saturday night for a guy that, I mean, he was in an okay spot coming into the race, but given the fact that he crashed at Atlanta, had an okay race at Watkins Glen, he wasn't in the safest spot, but he made sure he checked every box, won 2 stages, won the race, and got himself 7 more playoff points.
Yeah, I would never count him out. And even when things are looking a little more dire, like you said, after the first 2 races, like, yeah, you know he's going to come back. And when he comes back, he dominates. It's not just like, okay, had a pretty good race, and yeah, kept himself in the playoffs. No, he just took control.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the race itself, and this wasn't because of the dominance, but there just wasn't a whole lot of excitement compared to what we've seen in past Bristol night races. And when you think back to the spring race, which was one of the better short track races we've seen in quite a while because the tires were just disintegrating left and right, brought back the same tire, different temperature, different weather conditions, obviously compared to the spring, but there was literally little to no tire fall off the entire race. Passing was very hard. Didn't see a whole lot of movement throughout the field. I think about guys like Keselowski and Truex that got stuck back in traffic with fast cars that just couldn't pass anyone.
No, it with the racing religion. We talked about it before that I've really felt like the racing was better with the Xfinity race. The night before, it was different. And yeah, you've got to have passing in a short track like that. Otherwise, yeah, you're just riding around in a cereal bowl.
Right.
And for 500 laps.
And I hate that we're still having this discussion year 3 into the next gen era, that we're still trying to figure out what to do with short tracks. We've changed the spoiler, we've changed things on the underbody, we've done everything to the outside of the car that we seemingly can do. Now we're focusing on tires, and as successful as the spring race was, as successful as what we saw at Richmond a couple weeks ago with the option tire, it's such a moving target because, and I think back to Denny Hamlin's podcast after the spring race. Like the next day, he said, yeah, the tires were bad, but if we ran that race again tomorrow, we'd get 50 more laps out of them because now we know. We have a notebook on it. And that's the thing. These teams are smart. They're full of engineers. All these crew chiefs are geniuses, right? You give them enough data on something, they're going to science it out where it does not affect them as much. And that's my concern with tires being the quote-unquote solution to short track racing is it's such a moving target. You can have a great race, and the next time you go back there with the same thing, it can suck again. And I hate that that's the point where we're at, because for every other generation of car, short track racing was never a problem. No,
exactly. And you just wonder, is it... There's so many things to consider. Again, is it a horsepower thing? Is it... You just feel like it's got to be something with the car, and you can't just lay everything on the tires, because you're right. Otherwise, you're never going to solve it. And with all the data they have, why have they not mastered this yet and figured this out for the short tracks?
Well, many drivers have been outspoken that horsepower is the issue. NASCAR has been very resistant on changing that, and that goes back to the manufacturers as well. So, unfortunately, we have to play in the sandbox of the 670 horsepower, and tires seem to be the only other solution. Again, it's just very, very hit or miss, to where I don't have a lot of optimism that Martinsville, the penultimate race of the season, or Phoenix at the end of the year are going to be that much different than what we saw a year ago.
Yeah, very true. And yeah, you're right. I mean, when you listen to, especially, and you would think that the manufacturers would listen a little bit more to people like Kyle Larson, who is one of the ones that has been very outspoken about the horsepower. I just don't, again, I don't know what the resistance is. Cost-wise, it's not that different from anything that I've, read and researched. It's not like it's going to impact the cars or the teams financially to not be able to update that. So you're right. Right now, we all have just play nice.
I think people would have looked at you really crazy 5 years ago if you would have said, glad we're leaving Bristol and going to Kansas this
right.
weekend, because that's going to be a much better race.
Yeah, that's kind of sad, isn't it? Mm-hmm.
It's the state of the next-gen car, unfortunately, which, again, great on mile and a halfs, which for a long time were very stagnant and dull, but the short track racing has certainly suffered, and hopefully they can figure out some kind of solution as we get set to enter year number 4 of this car in 2025. All that being said, we did have our first round of eliminations in the playoffs this past weekend. Ty Gibbs, Martin Truex Jr., Brad Keselowski, and Harrison Burton all fail to move past the round of 16. Look, Harrison Burton, not really a surprise.
No.
He was, woefully underperforming prior to his win at Daytona. Gibbs surprised me a little bit because while he hasn't won, has been very consistent, and I thought a place like Bristol would kind of play to his skill set. Truex Jr. and Brad Keselowski both just ran into issues when it came to, I think Truex had a speeding penalty on pit road, and Keselowski just did not have the speed at all on Saturday night.
No, which is so surprising. You would think his team would have him dialed in, but I was actually surprised because I really thought maybe Briscoe would end up not making the cut or something like that, but it ended up seeing Ty Gibbs didn't surprise me. The Keselowski did, for sure. Martin Truex Jr. I didn't expect to go further. I was hoping he would, but he can't buy any luck this season.
Doesn't seem to be that way. And round 1 with Atlanta and Watkins Glen thrown in there kind of presented itself as a bit of a wild card type of round, which has normally been the round of 12 with Talladega and the Roval coming up here in a couple weeks. And when you look at like Austin Cindric, with the amount of points that he got, Daniel Suarez advancing through, Chase Briscoe, as you mentioned, I don't think anybody saw those guys walking out of the first round. A lot of people probably had all 3 of those guys getting eliminated along with Harrison Burton. But the fact that you had these different types of races where it's not so much about your equipment as it is maybe a little bit of luck at a place like Atlanta, it allowed these guys to put themselves in a position to advance through.
Absolutely. And I think, again, looking at the next set of races that we have coming up, do I see Kansas? Do I see Chase Briscoe doing well at Kansas? No, I don't think he performs well there. So I think the races coming up are going to be another set of challenges, and I don't think it's going to surprise us who is eliminated in the next to get to the round of 8.
Yeah, I think this weekend's race at Kansas is the most important from the standpoint of if you're a Larson, if you're a Logano, getting that win out of the way and advancing yourself through where you don't have to worry about Talladega, you don't have to worry about the Roval, because, again, anything can happen there.
Yep.
And as great as Larson is, he can't buy luck at a super speedway to save his life.
No.
He can be in the top 5 in the last lap. He's going to be one of the ones that ends up wrecked and ends up finishing 30th. So I think it's paramount for somebody like him to go ahead and get that win out of the way this weekend to where you don't have to worry about your luck at the Talladega or the Roval in the next couple of weeks.
I would agree with that. I'm looking forward to the racing at Kansas. I know that Logano has done really well in the playoffs in Kansas, and I know that Larson's been pretty decent there. He's a repeat winner. Denny Hamlin is a repeat winner. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to kind of see how that all plays out as far as the end of the race. It'll be curious.
Yeah, well, it's certainly not lacking for storylines for the first couple weeks of the playoffs so far, and can't believe only 7 races to go before we crown champion.
I'm not ready for the end of the season, because that stretch between the end of the season and the beginning of the season, yes, you have all the holidays and everything, and that's great, but I don't want to see it go.
Yeah, I don't either. It comes by too fast, and that off season is very, very long, but certainly plenty of excitement going on with the playoffs. And this time next week, maybe talking about somebody punching their ticket to the round of 8.
I can't wait. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Jen Jensen from the early game. This has been our weekly NASCAR segment. Come up, we'll wrap up hour number 1 of the Extra Point. Talk about this Matt Sluka situation with UNLV that broke overnight, because it is definitely big news in college football. Is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on the game. Welcome back into the Extra Point. Tyler Head wrapping up our number one here on the game. Some interesting news breaking overnight in relation to college football that you may have missed, revolving around Matthew Sluka, who is the quarterback at UNLV. UNLV off to a very good start so far this season, sitting at 3-0 as of right now, and a team that is in contention, or was in contention, for maybe one of those coveted spots in the college football playoff as a representative of the Group of Five, which made this story all the more wild when overnight UNLV quarterback Sluka put out a statement announcing that he will be redshirting and not playing the rest of the season. Said, I committed to UNLV based on certain representatives that were made to me, which were not upheld after I enrolled. Despite discussions, it became clear these commitments would not be fulfilled in the future. I wish my teammates the best of luck this season and hope for the continued success of the program. So the quarterback that is leading this team to potentially maybe its best season ever said, I am not going to play anymore because you have not came through on whatever promises were made. I imagine we're talking in terms of dollars here via NIL up to this point so far. Oh boy, this is quite a mess of a situation. I will say this. I, to a degree, get where Sluka's coming from here. Because if you were promised $500,000 for your services as a quarterback prior to, because keep in mind here, this guy was played at Holy Cross at the FCS level, transferred to UNLV, I imagine for some dollar amount via NIL, was probably told, hey, here's what we can give you if you come and play for us, after he put up really good numbers playing Holy Cross. And for whatever reason, through 3 games, he has not seen said dollar amount up to this point. Again, we don't know these numbers. This is just speculation of what the situation is here. So I understand that to a point. Like, hey, you said I was going to be paid X amount of dollars. I've not been paid X amount of dollars, and it's very clear you're not going to pay me that money, so I'm not going to give you my services anymore. That being said, it is a horrible, horrible look to just quit on your team like this. Again, UNLV is in the midst of what could be the best year in program history. This is a team that many were penciling in as a potential college football playoff team. They beat Kansas the other week. They've got matchups coming up with Boise State down the line. They drubbed Houston in week number 1. Like, this team is legit and could very well be in the college football playoff when it's all said and done if Matthew Sluka had continued to play. And this goes back to something that we talk about so much. And I just want to put it out there. As I've said many times, I am pro player. I am all for players being able to benefit from their name, image, and likeness, make the money, because college football is a billion-dollar industry, and for 100 some odd years, almost 150 years, those players were seeing none of it. So I'm cool with that. But this is the ugly part of it. This is where we get in to the mess of what this model is, where you have these collectives having to scrounge together this money each and every year to pay for talent, right? The NCAA can say it's not pay for play as much as they want. It is. And that's what it has been. Now, there's rumors out there that some other school has offered him more money to transfer out, and we can't confirm that as of right now. That's still just a rumor at some point, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Again, he was promised some kind of dollar amount to come to UNLV, and they didn't pony up for it. And again, I get that to a degree, saying, hey, I'm not getting paid what I thought I was going to be paid, so I'm not going to give you my services anymore, which again goes back to the mess of this structure and model as of right now, where, you know, there is not these legally binding contracts beforehand saying, okay, you're going to sign for us and we're going to pay you X amount of dollars by this date or by this year or whatever it may be. It's all very fluid, and promises are broken all the time. I think back to the Jaden Rashada situation at Florida, where, you know, he signed with the expectation he was going to be paid X amount of millions of dollars. Gets to campus, sees that's not the case, decides, you know what, I'm going to leave. I'm going to transfer out to Arizona State. Now he's at Georgia and now trying to sue Billy Napier and the Florida football program. This isn't sustainable. It's got to be wrangled into some degree. There is the big change on the horizon that we expect to be maybe as soon as next fall, where players officially become employees that can, potentially straighten this out a little bit. I don't know if it will. That's the hope, at least, because this is another example of the ugly side of what NIL is. And again, while I understand to a degree where Luke is coming from for not wanting to give his services anymore to the team that's not going to pay him what he was promised, what a bad look to just outright quit on your team. I mean, he's still on the roster because he's taking a red shirt. I can't imagine the dynamic in that locker room, especially if UNLV goes out there and starts losing games that the guy that can lead you to wins is sitting right there and refuses to play for your team. But it's a classic case of not hating the player, but hating the game, right? Because we're operating within this new realm of NIL, and these are the kind of consequences of it. And it continues to just divulge into more and more chaos. And I hope this new model coming down the line fixes it, but I don't know that for sure. None of us do. We hope, but it's a classic case of toothpaste out of the tube. Sometimes you just can't get all of it back in. And this Lucas situation is the latest example of the true wild, wild west that we're living in now in this new reality of college football. Plenty more to get into about this as the morning goes along. Get Wes and Chris's thoughts on it coming up in the 11 o'clock hour as well. Coming up next, we'll dive in to some of the big matchups of college football this week, and particularly one huge one out there in Tuscaloosa between Alabama and Georgia. Again, tonight, Carolina Calls, Lamont Paris, Derek Scott, 6 o'clock, which you listen to right here on The Game in Columbia and Myrtle Beach. Hour number 2 of The Extra Point coming up next here on The Game. Hour number 2, welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyrant along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. Of course, no Gamecocks in action this weekend on their bye. Get the opportunity to sit back and watch what else is happening around the SEC and college football. And for the first time, we have a pretty good slate of SEC matchups on the docket this weekend. Only one cupcake, that's LSU taking on South Alabama. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, at noon on ABC, you'll get a chance to watch Ole Miss and Kentucky and finally learn maybe a little bit of something about Ole Miss before they come in here next weekend and see if Kentucky can capitalize off the momentum that they had of that narrow loss to Georgia a couple weeks ago. Auburn and Oklahoma going to play in the, well, really don't know what our quarterback situation is, bowl, as both teams scramble to try and move forward without the, most ideal quarterback situations going forward. Again, Michael Hawkins named the starting quarterback for Oklahoma ahead of that matchup. Arkansas feeling pretty good coming off of their win against Auburn this past weekend as they'll take on Texas A&M. Southwest Classic and Jerry World as A&M's trying to find its footing a little bit. They've been a little bit up and down the first couple games this year. Marcel Reed has actually looked pretty impressive in his first couple starts, and we'll see how they do against Arkansas. And Texas is going to get their first SEC contest, a bit of a layup as they take on Mississippi State without Blake Shapen now at quarterback out there. And I believe that game is in Austin as they build up to playing some high-level competition in the SEC as the weeks go by. But all eyes this weekend are going to be on Tuscaloosa as Georgia pays a visit to Alabama, number 2 versus number 4, one of the biggest matchups in all of college football this season. Reese Davis yesterday on the Paul Feinbaum Show talked a little bit about the magnitude of Georgia and Alabama this year.
Very different, Paul, because this is a rivalry that is born of excellence, not one that's born of tradition. And that has particularly been the case since Kirby Smart arrived at Georgia. Really, even, you go back to the 2012 SEC championship game and the 2008 regular season matchup. It's always been a meeting of great teams. But when you take Nick Saban out of the mix, it changes the dynamic a little bit because there has been such great familiarity between the two programs. And on some level, that's still true. But with Kalen DeBoer and his offense, Kane Womack and his defensive system being a bit different, I think it really adds a unique twist to the game that we'll see on Saturday night, and it makes it a lot of fun.
Reese brings up a really good point there because this is not denoted as a usual rivalry in college football. Like Alabama and Georgia can go years without playing each other, but when they square off, there is no doubt that all eyes of the college football world are on them given the magnitude of both programs. And once again, like I said, this is potentially the biggest matchup of the entire year in all of college football. Yeah, Georgia and Texas may beat that here in a couple weeks, but for the time being, as always, the magnitude of this game can certainly not be understated. Both sides in this game have points to prove. Obviously, the objective is to go out there and win the game and put yourself in the best position moving forward. But when you think about the dynamic of this matchup and what it's meant over the past couple of years, it's a little different this time around, right? Georgia is trying to lay claim to being the top dog in all of college football. They've won 2 out of the last 3 national championships in the, back-to-back in 21 and 22. But I don't know if they're still seen as the overall best program due to the head-to-head with Alabama. More specifically, the head-to-head between Kirby Smart and Nick Saban. Kirby's 1-5 in those matchups, dating all the way back to the first time they saw each other in the 2017 national championship game. Nick Saban just continually got the better of Kirby Smart, with the exception of the 2021 national championship game in Indianapolis. And then you turn around and Nick Saban gets the last laugh on his way out the door in the SEC championship game, one that everybody picked Georgia going in, because this is not the best Alabama team. But and do you remember that game? Alabama dominated in the trenches, something that Georgia has hung their hat on in the Kirby Smart era. Alabama shoved them around like they were children in that game for the most part. I know it was a 3-point loss, but it was a more thorough victory for Alabama than the final score does need to indicate. They dominated that game. And that was, Saban's actually, final win against Kirby Smart in the SEC championship game. So that has been the consistent hang-up with the Kirby Smart Georgia program is, man, they just can't get over that Saban hump. Well, now Saban's gone. And this is an opportunity this weekend for Kirby and Georgia to say, well, this is our yard now. The old guard is gone. We're the new bully on the block in college football, and you're going to have to go through us to win. Because for the longest time, that's how people viewed Bama. There's a reason the saying, we want Bama, got so much play in it. Because if you wanted to be the best program in college football, you had to go through Bama to get there. And this is a potential changing of the guard opportunity that's at stake this upcoming weekend. On the Alabama side of things, it's for a chance for them to remind people they're still Alabama. The chaos of, was it January 12th, January 11th, whenever it was, when Nick Saban retired, it is a day in my time in this business that I'll never forget. And we quite literally spent the entire day the next day talking about nothing but Nick Saban, because that is how big of an impact he's had on the game of college football. The greatest college football head coach of all time. No debate. He's past Bear. He's past all these other legends. Like, he is alone on top of the pedestal and probably always will be. But he's not there anymore. And when you look at the success that Alabama's had, it is because of Nick Saban in recent memory. Of course, the Bear Bryant years speak for themselves. Stallings got a title back in the 90s as well, too. But the thought was, well, when Nick Saban finally retires, Alabama's going to fall off the mountaintop, right? We don't know, because they haven't been put in a position to fall yet. They've played 4 games so far this year, 3 games so far this year, I guess. And the struggle against South Florida aside, which they ended up making look better with the touchdowns they tacked on at the end of the game, they still very much look like Alabama. They're still a very talented team. Yeah, you lost a couple guys, via the portal, but they brought in another top class. They are still plenty deep at just about every spot. The only difference is there's a different guy on the sidelines. There's a different guy in the press conferences. That is very different than Nick Saban. And he's got an opportunity Saturday night to prove in his first SEC conference game. This is his debut in the SEC as a conference coach against, again, what has been one of the better programs in these past handful of years. This is your chance, if you're Kalen DeBoer, to prove that, well, you can change the name at the top, but Alabama's still Alabama. It can also prove that doing things differently can work. Think about the dynamic difference between Nick Saban and Kalen DeBoer. It's pretty night and day when you think about it. Like, you've seen the pictures and the videos from practice. Guys are having fun. They're taking selfies. They're doing podcasts. The Roll Tide Willie guy was at practice in the offseason. Like, Nick Saban would never let those things happen. Nick Saban was nose to the grindstone, hard butt coach that chewed players out at a regular. That was just part of daily life. If you ever listen to an Alabama player talk about, Nick Saban's discipline of his team on a day-to-day basis, it's like a military general. And it worked. And when you win, people are okay with that. Kalen DeBoer, a little bit more of a player's coach, right? A little bit more of a arm around you. Hey, bud, that didn't go well, but I know you're going to do better next rep and all that kind of stuff. Completely different than what Nick Saban was. And again, up to this point for Kalen DeBoer, it's worked. He's won everywhere he's been. His record speaks for itself. Well, he's got 12 losses in like 10 plus years as a head coach. He took a Washington team to the national championship a year ago. Like, this guy's a winner. This is his chance to prove it this weekend. And It's also an opportunity, if he loses, to see how quickly the Alabama fan base might turn on him. Because you know that's going to happen, right? Especially if Georgia goes in there on Saturday and beats them, I don't know, by like 14 or 17, to where it's not really close, and it's a pretty convincing win. Because Alabama rarely loses in Tuscaloosa in general. But they certainly do not get pushed around in Tuscaloosa a lot. If Georgia came in and won, let's say, 38-20, to where it's really not even close there at the end, then I am very intrigued to see how quickly the narrative shifts on Kalen DeBoer. Because up to this point, everything's been good. Again, retained most of the talent, brought in a really good recruiting class, has won every game so far, minus the shakiness against South Florida, but there's been no reason for the fan base to look at Kalen DeBoer and say, this isn't working. But if you go toe-to-toe with what is looked at as the newer version of what Nick Saban built, and you can't compete with them, that narrative is going to shift really quickly. Those people that have been singing Kalen DeBoer's praises out there in Birmingham and Mobile and all across the state of Alabama are going to be like, we believed in this guy, and he went out there and did that. I'm not saying it's going to be on a hot seat. I'm not saying they're going to fire him. Like, that's ridiculous. But this one game for Alabama means a whole lot to this fan base, because it is the true litmus test for Kalen DeBoer if this new era of Alabama football can be as good and successful as the past one. Now, I say that. Is Kalen DeBoer going to go out there and win 6 national championships? No. But it's about keeping yourself in that same realm, especially in a 12-team playoff era where Alabama should have no excuse for not being in the 12-team playoff, right? But if you go out there and get handled by Georgia this weekend, then there's going to be some lost belief from folks out there in Tuscaloosa and around the state of Alabama like, I don't know if this guy has it. That is one of the more interesting dynamics of this game that I'm intrigued to see play out if Alabama does lose. But on the flip side of things, if Georgia loses, then it's like, well, this is just an Alabama problem, because you change the head coach, completely different guy, somebody that has not had as much success as Kirby Smart as a head coach up to this point, and he still beat you. So what does that mean for Georgia? Can they ever get over the Alabama hump, save for that one game in the national championship? Maybe not. Maybe it's just something about those crimson uniforms and the numbers on the helmets that just is kryptonite to what Kirby Smart has done at Georgia. A lot on the line this weekend. That being said, the importance of this game is different this year, given the 12-team playoff at the end of the year. I'll tell you why, and why that is a good and a bad thing coming up. It is the Extra Point. Remind you, the Loyola-Lisa Special Teams Touchdown Contest rolls on for another week. When Ole Miss comes to town, $500 will be in the pot for your chance to win if South Carolina can score a Special Teams touchdown. Go online to 1075thegame.com. Register for your chance to win the Loyola-Lisa Special Teams Touchdown Contest. The 12-team playoff effect is very present in this game this weekend, and I don't know if that's a good thing. It's coming up next here on the Extra Point. Here. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Points Hour. Head along with you on your Wednesday here on the game. Coming up at 10:30, Ryan Nanny from the Shutdown Fullcast going to be joining me, talking a little bit of college football as well as a pretty cool project he has coming up about the new podcast he's launching about who killed college football. Pretty interesting dynamic, especially, given the conversation we had a little bit earlier about, Matthew Sluka and everything going on with NIL. So excited to talk to him about that coming up here in a couple minutes. But as I mentioned a moment ago, in previewing this matchup between Alabama and Georgia, where there's a lot of importance placed on both sides of it. But the feel of this game is different because we're in a new era of college football. I'll say this. I'm excited about the 12-team college football playoff. I was excited about the 14 playoff when it came about in 2014. I like the fact that we get more high-quality football happening in the month of December. We get multiple rounds of it now as opposed to just the 2 games to decide who's going to go to the national championship. I like the fact that there's going to be more games that matter in the month of November because more teams are going to be in the running for the playoff, as opposed to in years past where, all right, well, you lost your second game. That's it. You're done. Good luck trying to get to the Peach Bowl or something like that in a non-college football playoff, because that's about as high as you can go. But the opposition that a lot of people have had to the expansion of the playoffs is the effect that it has on the regular season. The common pushback is that, well, it's going to water down what the regular season means. And that is true to a point. As I mentioned a moment ago, you don't have to be perfect anymore. When you go back to the BCS era, where it was only 2 teams that got a shot at the national championship, you either had to be undefeated or have 1 loss. When you went into the 14 playoff, it was pretty much the same thing. We never saw a 2-loss team make the 4-team college football playoff. You got 1 mulligan during the year, and if that loss was not to a high-level team, that could also ding you enough to where you had to be almost as close to perfect as possible to still have a shot at playing for the national championship. And that's something that I've always appreciated about college football, that its regular season has meant more than literally any other sports ever has. I mean, we look at something like college basketball and the expanded NCAA tournament, which now, including play-in games, has 68 teams and is set to potentially expand to a couple more, here in a couple years. The regular season doesn't matter. As long you do just enough to get yourself in the tournament, and that is all anybody cares about. Yeah, it's cool when you win, the regular season championship or the SEC tournament, but everybody's focused on just making the tournament, doing enough to make the tournament, and that is all that matters. So you can be a 10 or 12 loss team and still make the tournament and run your way and win the national championship if you're good enough. But it is severely devalued what that regular season means. And again, to a point, the expanded 12-team playoff in college football is kind of doing the same thing. And when I look at this matchup this weekend, look, it's a huge matchup. Like I said, it is potentially the biggest game in college football this entire year. But the consequences of losing are not quite the same as what they've been in years past. Think about any other time when you've had a top 10, top 5 matchup between 2 undefeated teams. The sense of urgency for the team that loses skyrockets, right? Because again, we've lived in a model and a system where having more than 1 loss is a death sentence to your hopes of winning the national championship, save for LSU back in 2007, which that in and of itself was just such a bizarre season. It kind of stands on its own to a degree. But if this game is happening last year or a couple years ago in a 14 playoff era, we're talking about, all right, Georgia and Alabama facing each other off as undefeateds. Winner going to be feeling great. Winner probably has an argument to make for being the new number 1 team in the AP poll, given how high quality this one was. But the loser? Well, the loser has no room for error anymore. The loser is going to have to be perfect from here on out if they want, A, a shot at a rematch, potentially in the SEC championship game, and B, any shot of making the college football playoff. Because if this game happens last year and say Georgia loses, well, then you say, okay, well, Georgia must run the table from here on out, the rest of the season, if they want any shot at winning the national championship. That's no longer the case. Now, we are yet to see a 12-team playoff unfold, but given what we know up to this point, the selection process and just data from years past, there's going to be 2 and 3 loss teams in the college football playoff. Like, that's just going to happen. There's more room for error in this new era of college football that, to me, takes a little bit of the teeth out of this game, because there's no panic necessarily with whatever team loses. It's still a big game. It's still very important. And obviously winning's better than losing. But regardless of who loses this weekend, all their goals are still very much in front of them. And not to the point of, well, if they run the table all the way out, then they're good. No, you can still lose multiple games and be okay. Like Georgia, if they lose to Alabama this weekend and lose to Texas coming up next month in Austin and go 10-2, even if they miss the SEC championship game, they're probably still going to get in. And that is the one thing about the playoff being expanded that does bother me. That the consequences of losing these high-level games don't mean what they once meant. Because you tune into these games in years past, and you're watching life and death. You're watching the hopes of one team's season potentially be put on life support by losing the game. And that's not quite the case anymore. Now, again, I'm still going to enjoy it. We're all going to enjoy it. But the conversation coming away is not going to be this sense of urgency for whatever team loses. It's going to be, hey, Alabama or Georgia won. They're in the catbird seat now, leading the SEC standings, potentially the number one team in the AP poll and all that kind of stuff. The other team, you lost, but you're probably still ranked in the top 10. And again, going to be favored in most of your matchups down the road, most of them at least, to where you still got a good shot at the playoff. Like, this is not the eliminator that it has been in years past. And maybe that doesn't change your feelings around this game. And maybe it won't change mine in watching it on Saturday. But leading into it, I laid out the stakes and what this means for Kirby, what this means for Kalen DeBoer, and all that kind of stuff. But the loss doesn't quite hit the same way that it has in years past. And that, to me, is just an interesting dynamic that we're going to feel as the season goes along as well. When, again, Georgia and Texas play later on this year. When Alabama and Tennessee play later on this year. When, assuming Michigan can continue to win, when Michigan and Ohio State play this year. Because it just doesn't quite mean the same for the team that loses as it has before. But it's a new reality of college football. It's what we're going to have to get used to and what we're all going to have to accept. And that thought may leave your mind as time goes on. Is just the new reality of getting used to it. But for being so conditioned for many years in a BCS era and a 12-team playoff era to know that, man, when you lose one game, you better not lose another one or you're done. And now that's kind of gone is a little bit weird and something that we're all just going to, unfortunately, have to kind of get used to. Regardless, big game, excited for it, and it should be a fun one on Saturday night, 7:30 on ABC. We'll talk about what's going on around college football as well as what's potentially killing college football coming up next with Ryan Nanny from the Shutdown Fullcast as the Extra Point rolls along on your Wednesday here on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday here on The Game. Time to head out to the Love Chevrolet phone lines. Welcome in. You know him from the Shutdown Fullcast, but soon to be a new podcast, Who Killed College Football, which we'll get into here in just a couple of minutes. Ryan Nanni joining me now. Ryan, I appreciate your time. And I know, like all of us, this is the best time of year for you guys as far as content, and certainly enjoying the podcast here these past couple of weeks.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. Didn't expect to wake up and be figuring out what's going on with UNLV's quarterback. So
yeah, we talked about that a little bit earlier, and it's kind of a bit of a double-edged sword with Matt Sluka, because to a degree, I understand if you are promised something and you get to UNLV and suddenly they say, we can't actually pay you that. But man, walking out on your team in the midst of what could potentially be the greatest season in UNLV history, if things continue to go in the right direction, that's a tough look.
And I understand why people have big feelings about it in every direction. I guess where I come back to on it is, like, we only exist in this incredibly weird world because the conferences and the NCAA and the coaches, like, nobody decided to put a smart, organized system in place. And, like, you know, what's the closest we get to this in the NFL? Like a training camp holdout or something like that? And that's just because everybody understands, like, here's how your contract works. Here's what happens if you don't play under it. Like, there's just a level of clarity that, for whatever reason, the powers that be in college football have decided, like, yeah, we'll just let somebody else clean up our mess someday.
Do you think this is a possibility that Sluka is just calling their bluff and this gets resolved in the next couple of days?
I wouldn't rule it out. Sure. I mean, it's definitely I think what's interesting about that is you kind of wonder, okay, if that's what he does, number one, you can only sort of like pull that move once. And number two, I have no idea what that locker room is like. Maybe, you know, he was, my understanding, he was very well liked, a very, very good leader on that team. I don't know how that changes after all this if he does end up coming back. I don't know if the guys in that locker room are going to say, we understand, we support you, or if they're going to be, pretty pissed that they have this great start to the season, are trying to keep the momentum rolling, especially with the 12-team playoff where you start to get murmur about, are the Rebels going to grab one of those playoff spots? It's an interesting dynamic. Let's put it that way.
Certainly something that's going to be interesting to watch here as see how it all plays out if it does end up changing from Sluka's standpoint. Again, talking to Ryan Nanni from the Shutdown Fullcast, I want to get your perspective on some things across college football, but quickly want to start here with South Carolina. As we've seen them play 4 games so far this season, obviously, we're on top of them every single day here in Columbia, but for you that covers college football from a national standpoint, what have been your thoughts and what you've seen of South Carolina through 4 games so far this year?
Wildly unpredictable, they're a really hard team for me to get a beat on. I am certainly not as close to the action as y'all are, but I feel like there are a few things I feel like I have a handle on. The defensive line is terrifying. Like, I am not excited for anybody who has to go up against them. The pressure they generate, the havoc they cause, like that is, it's a lot of fun to watch. The LSU game sticks out in that regard, the Kentucky game as well. On offense, I don't know. Like, I feel like that's the half of the ball that I understand what they're trying to do on a week-to-week basis. Whether or not they can do it and how much they can sort of complement the defense feels like the question mark. But I think they're weirdly in a very good South Carolina place historically where they are a team you don't want to have on your schedule. It doesn't mean they're going to beat everybody left, and I'm certainly not predicting that they will, but I think they're more likely than not to drag most of their opponents into the kind of like tight fourth quarter game that they don't want to be in. They're not a pushover, even if they are in many respects, I think, incomplete or a work in progress.
Let's expand things out to the SEC now. Latest AP poll, five of the top 6 teams are all in the SEC with the exception of Ohio State at number 3. Do you view all these teams on the same level, or is there still kind of a tier separation between like what Georgia, Texas, and Alabama are doing compared to where Tennessee and Ole Miss are at right now?
I probably am more likely to put Tennessee into that upper tier just based on going into Oklahoma, beating them on the road. I think that was Oklahoma's first double-digit loss at home in something like 8 or 9 years. Ole Miss is, I think, just based on who they've played so far, is more of the question mark, sort of. And that has a lot to do with what Lane Kiffin has done. We've seen him sort of take these teams that can, win by 50 against lesser competition, and then when it's time to play a Georgia or Alabama, it kind of fizzles. It kind of doesn't go anywhere. At least on the Tennessee side, you can say, okay, well, Josh Heupel had that win against Bama, now has this win against Oklahoma, has demonstrated a little more of like getting up for these big games and being able to keep Tennessee competitive in them. Not 100%, but more so. So I would probably go ahead and put them in that category, and Ole Miss is the one that I just need more information on probably.
Talking to Ryan Nanny here on the Extra Point on your Wednesday on the game. I mentioned Ohio State, that one non-SEC team in the top 6 in the AP poll, kind of similar to Ole Miss. We've just not seen them play high-level competition to know a whole lot about them. We know that's a very talented roster that obviously did a lot of good things in the transfer portal this offseason. Do you still think that they are the best non-SEC team out there, or would you lean towards maybe a Miami or an Oregon at this point?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Miami is really enticing in that regard. Miami does not have the kind of schedule remaining that is really going to test that theory too much. Obviously, beating Florida at the start of the year, while very impressive, like I don't know how much stock we're going to put into that as the year goes on. They still got to play Florida State. That one feels like if they don't win it in pretty decisive fashion, it'll be disappointing rather than a feather in their cap. So you kind of got to wait till they get to the ACC championship game to know a ton about them. And, you play who you play. You can't do anything about that. Oregon, I think Oregon has that thing where they have looked a little stuck on offense coming out of the gate, but they are undefeated, and they beat a Boise State team that's pretty good and pretty tricky to play against. So I would say right now, you want to default and say that spot belongs to Ohio State just based on the talent that they have accumulated. I think that's probably fair. The nice thing is, if we have this conversation a month from now, we're going to have a lot more information, and we're not going to have to sort of be guessing about teams and sort of like, well, where do they fall into this? We'll have a much clearer picture.
For sure. One of the big reasons to have you on today, and appreciate our guy, Demetri Venos, for hooking up with us here, is this new podcast you have coming out that launches tomorrow, Who Killed College Football? And going back to what we mentioned a moment ago about the Slook situation, there's a lot of things that have changed in college football over these past handful of years that make it a whole lot different than what we grew up watching and loving for the past however many decades, depending on how old you are. How did this project come about, and what can people kind of expect to hear with this new deal?
So this is a project I'm doing with my colleague, Stephen Godfrey. And really the genesis of it was we sort of noticed that just talking to fans and listeners and things like that, people had this sort of like persistent feeling of like, man, all of this is changing and I don't know how I feel about it. And it feels like a lot of the decisions that are being made are not necessarily about what people who love college football would like. We decided, we kind of want to dig into that. It's really easy, I think. You look at what's happened with the Pac-12 and who they are or aren't adding over the last week. It's really easy to sort of get lost in the moment of like, what's the news that's happening and sort of, what rumors are real and which ones are fake. But we wanted to sort of step back and say, okay, how did we get here in the first place? Like, what is the path that sort of led us to the situation where, the ACC is having their media day press conference, and they're like, we're excited for Stanford and Cal to join the conference. Like, how do you even get to that place? So we just sort of wanted to tell a story and walk through some of the history so that we can all better understand why college football is in the place that it's in and maybe understand where it's going next.
In looking back on the history of how we've gotten to this point, anything in particular that really stuck out and surprised you?
There's one thing, and it's in episode 1. We were doing a little research into the BCS, which, fans of a certain age will remember was entirely unpopular, especially by the time we were done with it and moving on to a 14 playoff. ABC Sports was out in the media bragging about how they helped create the BCS when it first got started, that they were sort of like instrumental to the whole thing. And it just got to me because, I feel like television obviously plays a big role in why college football is the way that it is. But most of the networks now, I think, try to sort of stay quiet and let everything play out and sort of say, listen, conferences add who they add, whatever. This was really, it was just interesting to see, a point where not only was a TV network bragging about, how much influence and direction they had over college football, but about something that was really unpopular and really unsuccessful in a lot of ways.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to hearing all that. Again, the Who Killed College Football podcast launches tomorrow. I imagine this will be on all major podcasting platforms, correct?
That's right. Yeah. Anywhere you listen to a podcast, you can find this.
Looking forward to it. Again, that's Ryan Nanny from the Shutdown Fullcast and now the Who Killed College Football podcast. Appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll be checking in with you down the line as well.
All right. Thanks a lot for having me.
Absolutely. We'll come back and wrap up today's edition of The Extra Point. A lot of you weighing in on the Firehouse Subs text line about this Matthew Sluka situation going on at UNLV. We'll dive back into that coming up next, wrap up the show. It is The Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday on the game. Welcome back into the Extra Point. You heard the sounder. That's right. 803-404-6100. Caller number 6 right now. Win yourself a pair of tickets to go see South Carolina take on Ole Miss. Coming up next weekend, Terry Ford anxiously standing by to take your phone call to help you win those tickets. Wrapping up today's edition of the Extra Point, this Sluka story that Ryan Nanny and I talked about a few minutes ago is sweeping all of college football. A lot of you weighing in with your thoughts on the Firehouse Subs text line, also 803-404-6100. MW weighs in and says, unfortunately, the quarterback's not the bad guy here. It's going to take things like this happening in order to get the system fixed. And that goes back to part of what I said, in the last hour when I initially brought this up, that, if I'm Sluka, I, to a degree, get where he's coming from, because he was promised some kind of dollar amount, it seems like, to transfer from Holy Cross to UNLV. And when he got on campus, started playing games and winning with the Rebels, it was very clear he was not going to get what he was promised. And he said, okay, well, you're not going to give me what you told me you were going to give me, so I'm not going to give you my services of playing quarterback anymore. And there is something about having to look yourself in the mirror sometimes, right? To see just how bad it's gotten. And this is a shiny example of that, especially if UNLV's season goes off the rails. Malik Williams is their quarterback that's going to be starting this weekend against Fresno State. He's a 6-year guy, transferred over from Campbell, has not played a single snap for UNLV this season. There's a reason why Sluka was starting quarterback, because he won the job in camp and has been a big part of why they won these first 3 games. If UNLV falls off the face of the earth over the course of these next couple weeks because Sluka's not playing quarterback anymore, that brings more attention to what's happening here. Now, the flip side of that is we have certainly all been aware of the mess that this, lack of parameters on NIL has done to college sports over these past handful of years, but it hasn't changed a whole lot. In fact, the parameters have gotten wider and wider to now where these guys can inquire about what schools have to offer when going about transferring somewhere before getting to campus, because if you don't, that's a violation of your, ability to seek out the best value, right? Which, again, has gotten the NCAA in a number of lawsuits already up to this point. So the parameters have gotten even wider and wider when we talk about what NIL is. But, again, this is kind of one of the shining examples of the mess that we are currently in. Case from Gilbert, our buddy, chimes in and says, could NIL push colleges from the academic side of college to where one day we might see players playing in college football yet not attending college, nor plans of attending college? I would think initially probably not, but at this point anything is possible. That's the best answer I can give you. I was always, the way it was described to me years and years ago is that, the Athletic Association is its own entity, right? They pay for they have the rights to use the name and logo of the school, but other than that, they're kind of doing their own thing. And obviously the student athletes, in order to play football, you have to be a member of the school. But as things change going forward, who knows? Again, I would venture to think not, that you're always still going to have some kind of academic aspect to being a college football player, because it is still college football at the end of the day. But if that went out the window, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'd be shocked. It really seems like anything is possible at this point in time. I keep pointing back to this new model that is potentially coming as soon as fall of 2025, where players will become employees. There will be a set salary, we don't know what that is, for being a scholarship college football player. And you can still get NIL on the side, but it won't be completely up to the masses of fans to pay for the salaries of these student athletes. We think that's going to be better. I don't know, because there's always unintended consequences. I talk about all the time. When you make a major rule change, a major shift in the structure of what college sports is, there's going to be things down the line you say, didn't really see that coming, because there's plenty of those right now with NIL. When it came about in 2021, I think most of us thought, hey, it's cool. players will be able to get paid, and you can go do a commercial for the local car dealership if you're the star quarterback, and nice little money in your pocket. I don't think any of us saw being in this situation 3 years later, but it's where we are, and we have to navigate through it with hopefully the solution on the horizon. Don't know if it's going to be or not, but we have to hold out hope that that's what's coming. But the Saluk situation is certainly a wild one that really underlines where we sit now in this wild, wild west of the NIL. And again, maybe he's calling their bluff. Maybe he's just saying, you know what, if I say that I'm not going to play anymore and I'm going to redshirt, maybe they'll pony up whatever I was promised and I can be back on the field this weekend against Fresno State. We'll see. It's going to be something to watch, that's for sure. But that was wild news to break overnight in the world of college football. We'll continue this conversation, jump into some more things in the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Get Wes and Chris's thoughts on what has gone down with the Saluk situation at UNLV as well. It is Wednesday as we navigate through your bye week here on the Game. 11 o'clock on your Wednesday morning. Welcome in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs, Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark, along with you here on the game. As we're making our way through the bye week, we get the opportunity to talk a little more national things going on with college football, and I'll continue rolling with what I wrapped up the last hour with, this bizarre situation that we all kind of woke up to this morning around Matthew Saluka out at UNLV, who is now said after a 3-0 start, I'm not playing anymore, and I'm redshirting.
Well, I'm glad that Terry is here because, guys, according to reliable sources, Tyler Head has threatened to enter the transfer portal.
I'm redshirting, guys.
If he does not get a little bit more NIL.
I'm walking out. Terry,
you can confirm
Terry,
that?
You know my demands. I was promised something that you're not holding up your end of the deal on.
I cannot speak of this right now in the middle of a negotiation. Our cumulus legal department.
My agent will be in contact.
I was going to say, so really, let's just Terry's going to give his side, Tyler's going to give his side, and then none of the rest of us are going to know who's actually telling the truth.
Exactly. I'm going to lie, he's going to lie, and I'm just going to hope you believe me.
So depending on what you read and what you believe at this point, either he was promised some things and they were not delivered on the UNLV side, or, he just wants more money because they're off to a great start and he sees value. And at this point, I mean, somebody's going to have to provide some receipts before I know which side to believe. Because, I mean, if he's sitting there and he was promised Lord knows how much and he didn't get any of the money, and there was no communication and it was that, I'm not saying you should quit on your team, but we should not be surprised this should happen. If it's the other side, though, and he was promised something, for the most part, it was delivered, and now he's saying, well, I'm sitting out if I don't get more money, then that's pretty crappy.
Let's go over everything that's been said. So you see Sluka's statement. Came out at like midnight, right?
Yeah, news broke at like 12:30, 1 a.m. Most of us woke up to it this morning.
Yeah. Well, they are on the West Coast. So
well, that's
little earlier.
late night for them.
So he puts this out and basically said what you guys said. His line, basically, his explanation was some things that were promised were not delivered. The other side of this is what Carl Reed from 24/7, good follow on Twitter, by the way. He said, according to a source, which, guys, I'm going to take a wild guess, was somebody from the UNLV staff or somebody from the collective. He said that everything had been fulfilled, and then as UNLV played well, they got some playoff buzz.
It's beat Kansas the other day.
They're a good team.
They could be the
playing well.
G5 representative.
Yeah, they could. That the agents that he had hired, and the way he put it kind of made it sound like he had changed representation or just now got an agent. We know from when he was getting recruited out of the portal, he had an agency, and I think that agency has remained the same. That line from the sourcing was that basically the demands had changed and that those new demands were not going to be fulfilled. The dad has weighed in as well, basically saying similar things as his son. And then also, Marcus Cromartie of Equity Sports, per Pete Thamel from ESPN, has Marcus Cromartie, the agent, on record saying that Sluka was verbally promised a minimum of $100,000 from a UNLV assistant coach for transferring, and none of that money was paid. So you've got everybody on Sluka's side, including the agency, the dad, Sluka himself, saying this didn't happen. You've got some other sourcing. I couldn't tell you from where. That's obviously from UNLV or the collective or wherever, saying that the terms had changed. So like you said, Wes, without the receipts, it's kind of hard to know.
Yeah, and I'm gonna assume my man wasn't just going to UNLV for the fun of it. So I'm sure he was promised something. You also kind of wonder, what was he promised by the collective versus a coach on a whim just being like, hey, man, we can definitely get you 6 figures. Well, is that in writing? Is that, you know what I'm saying? So was everybody on the same page when he went there? Is there some gray area here? Like, is one side just completely lying and the other side is, just completely in the right? Or is there some gray area here? Was it not? Was there clearly everybody, it seems like, was not on the same page with this thing? Yeah, there's, I don't know, I think it's a classic case of the truth probably falls somewhere in between. And like you said a minute ago, Wes, like, purely from the standpoint of where Sluka is, because he was at Holy Cross originally and transferred to UNLV, if I was promised, let's just say $100,000 to come to UNLV, and I'm 3 games in, we've won all 3 of those games, and I'm a big reason why, and I've not been paid any of that, and there's no indication that I'm going to be paid any of that, I get it. Like, yeah, I'm not going to continue to give you my services as a quarterback if you're not going to give me what's promised. Now, again, is this a way of calling the bluff of the team, saying, all right, well, if you aren't going to pay me, I'm not going to play, and we're probably not going to be winning as many games and going forward to find that money somewhere? I don't know. But there's a lot more to come out of this as the news continues to evolve. Yeah, his dad quoted as saying, "We did not ask for a single dollar." The emphasis being, or the implication being, a single dollar more from what they originally were promised. And it's a pretty strong sentence, I feel like. Yeah. Also, just throwing this out there, does his dad know about every conversation that his son has had? Sure. That's another. The more we've been covering this stuff for a long time, the more you're in it, the more you realize you can have a great source tell you something, and you're like, oh yeah, that's solid. There's no way that anything else could be true. And then sometimes you realize, well, that was 100% true to the best of that source's knowledge. Mm-hmm. But, maybe Matthews told his dad everything he's ever said when it comes to this stuff. Was there, I don't know. Like, we may not ever know, honestly. Like, I would think some more information will come out about this, but will we ever get the full story, I think, is the question. Yeah, that's what at first I was like, hey, naturally as more comes out about this, we'll get an answer. And then I was like, no, actually, we might not. Because, more info might come out. More people might even go on the record about it. More anonymous sources may come forth with information. But that just might add to the confusion of it all, honestly. So if he transfers somewhere else to wrap up his career, we might get the full story then of, hey, what went down at UNLV on a podcast or an ESPN story down the road. But that will be his side of it. That would be his side. Yeah. So we've already gotten sort of what he is saying is his side. Do we get, are there, does anybody have receipts? Like, can anybody just be like, hey, this is what was agreed to. I'm seeing, this is all happening in real time. Let's see. Promise, like you said, a minimum of $100,000. To date, per Cromartie, Marcus Cromartie with his the agency that represents him, he only got $3,000 to relocate to Las Vegas. Well, and here's another problem with all this. So he pointed this out earlier, Wes, after we were talking about the assistant coach at UNLV apparently being the one who promised him this. Well, here's another problem that happens in this space. I know you and I have both heard some instances of this happening in the recruiting process. A lot of times, sometimes collectives are dealing straight with kids. Sometimes collectives are saying they're getting information from the coaching staff or a recruiting department at a school of, hey, this is what it's going to take. So let's use the number $100,000. Now, I don't know whether or not the collective was looped in on that or not. But we've heard instances of sometimes a collective is budgeting and understanding. Every collective in the country is strapped for cash. They're all just trying to make it, right? Even at big name brand programs. If you got $15 million as a collective, you need 15 more. Really, you could spend as much as you wanted. So they're all having this problem.
if a collective thinks, hey, it's going to take $100,000 to fulfill the obligation of this kid, cool. But what we've seen at times is sometimes an assistant coach or somebody in the recruiting department will say, hey, I'll get you 50 more. No problem, Or they'll tell a family member, maybe not the kid, we'll get you 25 when you get here. And then the people who actually have to fulfill that are left holding the bag, so to speak, an empty bag.
Yeah,
trying to figure out
not holding the bag.
Trying to figure out how to fulfill it. The collectives are the ones that are often having to do this. So it creates a difficult situation for sure.
So Equity Sports CEO Chris Cabot to On3, quote, at the end of the day, we know a school can't give a player a contract until he is enrolled. That's the whole reason why Florida State was slapped. We understand that sometimes there's going to be some flexibility. These schools can't put a term sheet in front of you. They can't put a contract in front of you. You just have to take people at their word. And at the end of the day, man, this, regardless of what actually happened, regardless of how it played out, this ain't good for UNLV.
No, not at all.
Like and I'm not even talking about you're 3-0 and you're about to lose your quarterback, because apparently the backup is pretty talented as well.
He's a Campbell transfer.
So now I'm a recruit considering UNLV, and I'm seeing this, regardless of what's true or not true, it's out there at this point. And one other little note on this, too. A lot of times these guys are not sort of paid in, like, it's not a salary. It's not a, hey, you will work this amount of time and we're going to pay you this amount per hour. We're going to pay you this amount for the year, per month. So a collective may say, hey, by the end of your time here, you will have made this much money. And that may not mean you take that amount of money and divide it by the number of months you were on campus. It may be upfront part of it. It may be half of it 1 month, and then you get nothing the next. So they're probably saying, I imagine, we're going to get that to you. We're going to get that to you. But at what point, obviously we reached that point. At this point, his family said, well, according to their version of the events, well, we're done waiting, basically.
We should probably save this for the other side, but I want to get y'all's thoughts on a bigger picture item of should this be able to happen, whether that's by rule or by should we have a structure in which this can happen? Because I think we all three of us here like the ability for players to be able to move around.
Right.
But should it be able to happen like this? I would like to dive into that a little bit.
We'll hit that coming up. Reminder, this Friday, halftime show and postgame show, going to be broadcasting live from the Ultimate Long Drive World Championships at Partee at 3209 Charleston Highway in West Columbia. Again, that's coming up this Friday, so come by and see us while we are out there. We'll continue this conversation about the Sluka situation at UNLV as the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs rolls on your Wednesday here on The Game.
All right, guys, you know it by now, or you should. Every single episode of this show presented by our friends at Firehouse Subs. One of the beauties of Firehouse Subs is that there are 14 Midlands Firehouse Subs locations and more on the way. So no matter where you are, I know we're getting close to lunchtime. No matter where you are, there's a Firehouse Subs near you where you're at right now. Order right now. Order ahead with the Rapid Rescue to Go. firehousesubs.com, or download the Firehouse Subs app. I've been telling you about it. Hopefully you already have it downloaded on your phone. If you don't, go ahead and get it now. Here's something new to try. The Firehouse Captain's Club featuring signature Captain Sorensen's hot sauce, their new Firehouse Hero sauce, savory oven-roasted chicken, melted pepper jack, crushed red pepper flakes, lettuce, tomato, onions, and my favorite part, crispy, smoky bacon. By the way, you can add bacon to any of the sandwiches. That's what I do. Close your eyes, order a sandwich, add bacon. Get it now from Firehouse Subs.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, West Metro Chris Clark along with you on this Wednesday. Continuing to look at this situation revolving around Matt Saluka at UNLV. And Chris, before the break there, you said you had a more big picture point coming away from this.
Well, a lot of people around, in the NCAA or people who might side with the NCAA, they constantly blame the players, the agents. Look, I get that. There are obviously problems here, but a big reason why we have this environment is because it was ignored and pushed back against so hard for so long. And I think this isn't an original thought. A lot of people have been pointing this out in the aftermath of this news, but people are kind of joking. Oh, if only there was a way to, sign players who get paid by collectives that are associated with teams. But the NCAA has just refused. They've tried to eliminate collectives. They've tried to eliminate any notion that you should be able to sign a player. What we have going on in football is pay for play. I don't care. You may say, well, NIL wasn't intended for that. It doesn't matter what it was intended for or not. That is what is going on. And so, yeah, it's different than the pro model, but increasingly college sports are becoming more professionalized. So my question is, should we just lean into it and say, look, like, I'm all for player movement. You know, I think if you want to transfer, that's fine. They're talking about removing the spring portal window and just having the one in December. I actually think that's probably a good idea. We can't limit these players' movement. We know that. And even if you think they shouldn't be able to move, you're going to lose that battle because it's being lost constantly in the courts. So players, yes, should be able to move. But, man, even me, who's like a player advocate for that, I don't like this. I don't think you should be able to say, hey, after 4 games, I'm bouncing. Now, you have the red shirt rule, which is why you can do that. He's played in some games. He can preserve a year of eligibility. He can move on after the season. But it's not because of injury. It's not because of preference. It's literally tied to the monetary aspect of it. So I don't know if I have a great answer on how we can prevent it. I just feel like nobody really wants this situation to happen. Matthew Sluka didn't want it to happen, right? The school doesn't want it to happen. College sports fans don't want it to happen. I think we got to come up with a way to where, yeah, you can move around. Heck, you can move around as much as you want, but you have to do it within the structure of, you know, after the season, especially if we're going to one portal window.
Well, and that goes back to something we've talked about quite a bit, this proposed new model of NIL and players effectively becoming employees and all that kind of stuff that theoretically could be in place as soon as 2025. We haven't heard a lot about that as of late. It's still ongoing legal battle with the NCAA and all that kind of stuff. So that is on the horizon. Will that fix all these things? That's something we don't know as of right now.
Could you not just, for one, so transfer guys don't sign they don't sign an NLI, their national letter of intent, like a high school player does, which I already think is weird and overcomplicates things, because I think you should be able to sign as a player an NLI, which then at least binds the school to you in terms of the scholarship. Well, I would propose that when you were signing the NLI, that because they apparently don't want these guys signing contracts with the school, or even, which I don't even know how they should have any control over a collective. Like, how can you even tell a collective, which is technically a third party, that you can't sign a contract with another person? In this case, they just happen to be playing college football. So what if you sign the NLI while you also sign your NIL deal at the same time? And also, when you sign that, you're binding yourself to that place for 2 years. You're saying, hey, I'm not hitting the portal for 2 seasons, but I'm also being able to take advantage of this by signing a contract either directly with the university, with their, for example, Gamecock Club or Garnet Trust, whoever. And we're all just going to agree on both sides that that's the mechanism we're using to do this. Protects the players because it puts it in writing. Protects the schools a little bit more in terms of being able to build a roster because you're agreeing to stay for 2 years.
Sounds good in theory.
Yeah, I mean, I do like that. And Kirby Smart has had something, I'm trying to look it up here in real time. He's had a similar idea on this.
Personally, I would prefer 3 years, but yeah, I don't know that. I think 2.
Yeah, I think 2's fair.
2 has a much better chance of not getting yourself sued into oblivion.
Right.
And what Kirby proposed is basically if a kid comes in and he's still eligible to get NIL, but he's going to, come in on scholarship, get to keep that scholarship for 4 to 5 years, and you kind of check that box. Or another kid comes in and says, I want to have NIL pay for play right now. I'm going to check that box. But the flip side is the school, the program, the collective, whoever can say, after a year, we don't really like our investment, man. We're going to terminate that agreement. So kind of a two-sided thing. I think the biggest issue is the fact that we're still trying to pretend it's not pay for play. If we just said, this is pay for play, then it's fine. You could contract the athlete to where, there would be a contract. Say this contract can be signed at any time. Remember how that, Chris Cabot from Equity Sports was saying there, hey, you can't do the agreement beforehand. Some people do them, but they're a great agency. They do a really good job. You're not supposed to be able to contract the athlete until they enroll. So if that agreement's signed, then there's a receipt, right, that can be put out in the media, litigated in a court, to where he says, I haven't gotten paid. It's pay for play. It's not some, a media agreement, whatever, however you have to put it now. I haven't gotten paid. I'm leaving,
It is an NLI, letter of intent, national letter of intent, not a contract.
It is.
So I don't understand how you can let somebody sign that, which again transfers don't, but high school players do, and also be like, but you can't sign a.
I think people feel like that's true. I think they become flimsy though. Like nowadays, you all see. Have you seen an example lately of a kid saying, "I want out of my NLI"?
No, they get out of it.
They get out of it, so.
But still, I think it's you're putting in a step. Like I think that would be a mechanism to sort of make things a little more official on all sides of it. And I also want to say, because I think this is important insight, there are, as you would expect, there are agencies operating in this space that do not handle things the right way. Imagine that. There are agencies operating in this space who have just poofed out of thin air because, now there's thousands of college athletes who need representation. And maybe the top agencies aren't beating down your door to represent you. So some Joe Schmo says, hey, I'll represent you. But that is not the case by all reports. So Chris Cabot, he's a CEO of Equity Sports. He spoke on this deal. All the reporting says that Saluka has been represented by Equity Sports. They are a top-tier agency. They represent professionals. They represent Patrick Mahomes. Like, this is not some made-up, I got up off my couch and said, I'm going to be a sports agent today. This is a legitimate sports agency.
Yes.
Which I think is important context when you talk about who's saying what in this whole thing.
Yeah, for sure. And again, plenty more will come out of this in time, I'm sure, but chaotic situation out there at UNLV. We'll jump back into some Gamecock stuff coming up next. We didn't get a chance to dive into everything recruiting-wise from the weekend against Akron. We're also hoping to be joined by former South Carolina assistant, current head coach of the Buffalo Bulls a little bit later on in the show, Pete Limbo. So keep an eye on that as the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs rolls along on your Wednesday here on The Game.
All right, friends, I've been telling you about our guys over at Classic Roofing. Joe Reeder, Max Sawyer, two owners. The great thing about Classic Roofing, when you call this number, 803-590-7870, you're going to deal directly with one of them. ClassicRoofingSC.com for more information about their services and where you can set up a free estimate. And if you if you don't have any roof damage right now, you still might want to go ahead and get that thing checked out so you can get an idea of what the life of your roof may be moving forward. But also, if you have potential damage to your roof, I know storms in the area all summer, some storms rolling in this week. If you do have roof damage, some places may just blindly tell you, hey, file an insurance claim, let them handle that. Our friends at Classic Roofing, they're not going to just blindly tell you that. They're going to help you come up with a plan that's going to be best for you and best for your wallet. 803-590-7870 or classicroofingsc.com.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs, Tower Head, West Mitchell. Chris Clark along with you on this Wednesday. Reminder, Carolina Calls coming up tonight with Lamont Paris since it is a football bye week, and Derek Scott. 6 o'clock right here on the game in Columbia as well as Myrtle Beach. Well, we talked a little bit about recruiting yesterday. Didn't really get to dive into some of the guys that were actually on campus this past weekend, but a couple of pretty notable names in the 2025 as well as the 2026 class for South Carolina that did get to come and attend the game against Akron, and including one guy we talked about a little bit yesterday, that being Malik Clark, the 4-star receiver out of Rock Hill.
Yeah, it's the guy South Carolina has maintained contact with, and you look at what Mike Ferry did the moment he got on campus and became South Carolina's receivers coach. Malik Clark, he became a major target for South Carolina, and if there was a stretch there where we really thought he was going to commit to South Carolina in the first place, obviously that didn't happen. He goes to FSU, and I would say even in the moments after that, we were kind of already thinking that may not be over. And so the big thing there, I think, whenever that happens, can you get that prospect back on your campus is always kind of the big sign, in my opinion, of mutual interest. And for South Carolina, that ends up happening. Obviously, this past week, they get Mike Tyler on campus as well, the local tight end from Hammond School, who's currently committed to LSU. So a number of guys, and that's only 2 of them, a number of guys that are committed to other schools that have been on campus for South Carolina here recently, and, you know, that we're keeping an eye on. You look right down the road at Dutch Fork and Josh Smith, the linebacker, who technically right now committed to Coastal Carolina, but is receiving a heavy push and has gotten offers from both Ole Miss and South Carolina in recent weeks. So I think he's a kid that is probably going to be hard for Coastal to hang on to. And, you know, you got heavy SEC interest there with those 2 offers. So it kind of felt like 2025 class was maybe, I don't want to say done, but for the most part was in place. And now I think, not out of nowhere, but sort of it was quiet. Now we have, I don't know, Chris, maybe 10 or more guys that are still just out there floating around who could ultimately be in this 2025 class.
And I think a lot of them, heck, it seems like about half of them probably flips, you know, potential flip candidates. So that's always fun. People love tracking flips. You know, we knew that when a Jared Smith, and he wasn't on campus this past weekend, he was on campus for the LSU game, but when a Jared Smith committed to Auburn, when Malik Clark committed to FSU, you knew, like, hey, this one's probably not over. And frankly, with a Jared Smith that he committed to South Carolina this summer, we'd be sitting there saying, hey, Jared Smith was at Auburn this weekend, or watch out for Auburn as a potential flip. Like, that battle everybody knew was going to continue. So Malik Clark kind of came down to the wire, figured there would be some reasons to continue watching the Gamecocks. They got off to a pretty good start. Florida State off to a pretty bad start. That was a big selling point for them, right? Hey, Gamecocks went 5-7. We just went 13-0. Or they lost their bowl game, whatever. You know, we had a great regular season.
That never happened.
We were undefeated. And now that fire has gone out a little bit, you know. They did get a win over Cal. Big home win over Cal.
Very ugly win.
Very ugly win. So, yeah, a lot of guys still to watch. You know, I think defensive tackle, Wes, is another one where, you know, you got Xavion Hardy out there from JUCO. You've got some, you know, maybe the possibility of some high school guys, whether they're committed elsewhere, or, you know, just a guy popping up kind of late. That's the priority position. A lot of portal activity will follow, but you're right in that the past few weeks, there are a few more names now to track at the high school level.
Well, and I think, Chris, to your point about the 5-7 year, we constantly heard all summer, hey, this is something that teams are just using against South Carolina. And that's what you would expect. You would expect them to try to do that. But also, in that same breath, you're going, well, if South Carolina can get off to a good start, what does that do? How does that affect recruiting? And we will see what the rest of the season brings. But 3-0 with a very close, somewhat controversial, in front of a great home atmosphere loss to LSU. And if you're a recruit, you're going, well, hey, maybe all those things that these other schools and coaches said about South Carolina and their demise were exaggerated. Imagine that. And so I think you look now, if that was truly not, I don't think that's the entire recruiting pitch from FSU. Clearly, Malik Clark likes their staff, likes what they have going on. You know, it's not all that. But if that was any part of your pitch, and you are now Auburn, who is in the news for the wrong reasons right now as well, just in terms of throwing players under the bus, or you're Florida State, this really could not have started out any better for South Carolina in terms of trying to get big recruiting wins over traditionally strong football programs.
Just a little over 2 months away from early signing day as we see what South Carolina's 2025 class ends up looking like when it's all said and done. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, we are hoping to be joined by head coach of the Buffalo Bulls, Pete Lembo, of course, former South Carolina assistant, coming up here to wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. That's coming up next here on your Wednesday on the Game.
Just checking out some material here from our friends at Integrated Media on their website. That's integratedmediainc.com. If you want to check it out, they are your go-to for anything that you may need at your home from an audiovisual standpoint, home automation through their smart home systems, security and cameras. They can do it all. IntegratedMediaInc.com, or give Michael, Nathan, and the team at Integrated Media a call, 803-948-8327. I've trusted them to come out to my home. They've done several projects for me. Something as simple as mounting a TV if you don't have time, if you want to mount it in a place where maybe you don't feel quite comfortable, they can help you source the equipment. You don't have to go to the big box stores where you get poor service, a poor experience. Local company, Integrated Media, who's one of our partners right here on the Game. Let them get the equipment for you. Let them install it. They do a great job with everything. 803-948-8327.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you, hoping to be joined here in a couple minutes by Pete Limbo, though he is walking off the practice field up there in Buffalo. So we understand if maybe he's not available, but hopefully so. I'd love to talk to him about what his team did this past weekend. They went on the road and took down, at the time, a number 23 Northern Illinois team who just a couple weeks ago obviously had beaten Notre Dame in what was a huge victory for them. So things off to a pretty good start up there in Buffalo, 3-1 so far through the first month of the season for the Fighting Pete Limbos.
Chris, wasn't there some limbo ball involved in this W as well?
I'm told, he's calling in right now, actually, so we'll get him on. But, yeah, some limbo ball was involved with the last play of the game, last play of regulation, blocking a field goal.
Sounds about right on brand. Terry talking to Coach here right now. We'll get him on in just a second, but obviously somebody that we certainly miss having on for the press conferences here. Yeah. Oh. Okay. All right. We're working on it. But certainly miss Pete's stories, learning about wars and movies and all those kind of things, as he was certainly very entertaining in his time here at Carolina.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm seeing Terry talking right now. We'll see if that happens. But off to a great start, 3-1. And anybody who has seen the way he carried himself here running special teams, not surprised at all to see him get a shot as a head coach, and not surprised about their 3-1 start either.
Not at all. We are now joined by the head coach of the Buffalo Bulls, Pete Limbo. Pete, appreciate your time. Know you're a busy guy. First of all, congratulations on the big win this past weekend over Northern Illinois. I imagine there's a lot of good vibes and good moves around the program this week, huh?
No doubt, but we're trying to take it in stride, and we got a really good UConn test coming up. They just dismantled Florida Atlantic last week at home, and we got to travel down there, so there wasn't a whole lot of time to celebrate. We got back pretty late on Saturday night and turned our focus to UConn by Sunday night, but thank you so much.
Coach Limbo, Chris Clark here. Thanks for taking the time to do this on short notice. I know you're busy. Want to go back to the end of the game there, and if you could just recap that for the fans here. I thought that was probably particularly fun for you because there was a little limbo ball at the end of the game there with you guys making a huge special teams play, I believe, in regulation to send this thing to overtime.
Yeah, well, first of all, I got to tell you, it's so good to hear from so many Gamecock fans on Twitter and things like that, and just the text messages. And, you know, in a lot of ways, I feel like I've never left. And I think everybody knows that the Limbos are extremely grateful for the fabulous 3 years we had in Columbia, and that's home for us still in many, many ways. So just staying in touch with people like yourselves, it's really special for us. But, yeah, the end of the game, first of all, our defense played fabulous. The last 3 plays of regulation, forced a field goal when NIU could have won the game. That sent it to overtime, and then we had another 3 fabulous plays of defense to force them to kick a field goal and block that one. So now our offense goes out there, and we could be pretty conservative and just get it in position to kick the game winner ourselves. So it was really an incredible finish to the game, and really cool that special teams played a part of it.
Coach, Wes Mitchell here. Great to hear your voice. And I'm curious, I know obviously you've been a successful head coach before, but I am curious, as the game has sort of adjusted, obviously, you know, it's a different game than maybe it was then. What do you think your time here, having command of the special teams at South Carolina, and what do you think you maybe learned from that experience and have tried to pour in to your job there at Buffalo?
Sure. Well, whether it was Shane Beamer or some of the other guys like Mike Norvell that I worked for when I went back to be an assistant, you know, you pick up some good nuggets everywhere you've been, and South Carolina was certainly no exception to that. But the nice thing about coaching special teams is you're still always building relationships with every guy on the roster. So I went from 15 years as a head coach to several years as a special teams coordinator, but that entire time your mindset never changes in terms of the relationships that you're building from the top to the bottom of your roster. So jumping back in to this position here, you know, I feel like my time as a special teams coach really helped in that regard. And then the second thing I would say is just recruiting in the SEC and the competitive nature of recruiting and seeing what we did and how we did it at South Carolina, and working with some of the fabulous staff there, and having the opportunity to go recruit the places I did, like the DMV and the Northeast, it's really allowed us to hit the ground running here and put together what we think is a pretty good group of 5 type recruiting class so far.
And talking to former South Carolina assistant, now current head coach with the University of Buffalo, Pete Limbo. And, Coach, of course, the object is to go out there and win every single game. But in terms of the program overall, what does success look like for you in your tenure up there at Buffalo going forward?
I think it's always just reaching your potential, and sometimes you don't really know what the potential of your team is until you get to December and look back. I can tell you these kids have been on board since day one. They're really high-character guys. They practice hard. They play hard. They're resilient. They're poised. I think they've bought into what we're doing as a staff. So we'll see how it ends. But right now we're just taking it day by day, and it's certainly good to be ahead of schedule in terms of the wins and losses, but I don't think that would affect what we're doing and how we're doing it. We realize we still have a really long way to go to build the program.
Coach, you mentioned it earlier, trying to put that big win, 24-hour rule, I'm sure, in place, put the big win behind you, quick turnaround, get ready for UConn this week. For the Gamecock fans here who maybe want to check you guys out, can you give us just a little preview on a couple of things to watch in this matchup?
Absolutely. Well, our defense has really played lights out all season. It's been fun to watch those guys. And they just have a zeal about them. And Joe Bowen, our defensive coordinator, was actually a GA with us at South Carolina, Shane's first year in 2021, and he's doing a fabulous job running that unit for us. So we definitely play hard and inspired on defense. We're still a work in progress on offense and special teams, but we've got a solid O-line and a good group of running backs and an athletic quarterback who can run it a little bit. So hopefully we'll do a better job this week of staying on the field offensively and getting those defensive guys more of a break. But I think overall, just we play hard, and we play with some pride, and we play for 60 minutes. And I think, knowing the wonderful fans at South Carolina and how much they know and understand football, they would appreciate that about this team. And hey, we love to have we love to be somebody's second favorite team. So to hear from all these Gamecock fans all the time that we know are rooting for us down there in South Carolina, it really, for Jen and I, it's really special.
Coach, a little less than 2 minutes here, and since you mentioned South Carolina again, I feel like I've got to ask you. I know you're, in your own season and you're concerned with Buffalo right now. Have you had a chance to kind of keep up with what's going on in Columbia from a team standpoint, a special teams standpoint? I think Carolina blocked a punt against LSU, made some big special teams play. Kai's booming the ball. Everybody's still been thinking about you here. Have you been able to keep up with any of that?
Oh, absolutely. Following it closely and always rooting for the guys. And, I know Kai is having a great year. Kind of reminds me of 2 seasons ago. We know he was a little banged up last year, and to see him respond and just the entire special teams, but really the whole team. And I really felt like before I left, because, of course, it was, late January before I left, that we were really putting together a special team. And to see the success, how they're running the football and how hard the defense is playing, and some of the veteran guys that I've been around for 3 years and how they're stepping up and taking a real leadership role with this team, guys like Tonka and Boogie. It's just so rewarding to see, and in a lot of ways you feel like you've never left because our hearts are still there in a lot of ways, and the friendships and the relationships it's a really big deal to Jen and I and our entire family.
Well, Coach, like you said, you are still very much beloved here in Columbia. We certainly miss the history lessons and movie reviews in your weekly press conferences, but we're certainly excited.
Well, you just
got
to turn on the UB press conference.
That's right.
Just go to YouTube. You guys are missing out on your fix. Have at it.
Absolutely. We appreciate your time, Coach. Know you're a busy guy. I want to wish you and Buffalo the best of luck as the rest of the season goes forward.
All right, go Cox, go Bulls.
Absolutely. Coach
Appreciate
Pete
it,
Limbo
Coach.
up there in Buffalo. And again, 3-1 start coming off that big win against NIU. So things are rolling pretty well for the Limbo regime up there in Buffalo.
Same old dude, right?
That's right.
No surprises. Not surprised at all that he's still paying close attention to the Gamecocks. And, yeah, these coaches are in their bubbles, but they watch. They pay attention. I mean, if you're at that level, you're a football head. Like, you're watching any football you can get your hands on, I think. So, yeah, it is a busy job. We know they put in crazy hours, but I promise you he's probably watched at least part of every game South Carolina's played this year.
They also can get access to film very quickly.
That's true.
And fast forward and all that, all 22. Hey, by the way,
they don't have all those commercials.
Another former Gamecock assistant who now runs his own program, Jody Wright, tomorrow. Murray State head coach. He will be joining us.
Get the lowdown on Missouri. We should have asked Limbo for his thoughts on Missouri, too.
Go Racers.
That's right. That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show myself, Terry Ford, up next here on the game.
When things go wrong at your house, guys, you know, it can be stressful. And the first thought that I always have is, am I going to be able to find somebody to fix this thing who's going to be honest, upfront, do a good job, and do it at a good price? That's exactly what I found at Krantz Cooling and Heating. So any HVAC issues that I have in my HVAC units at the house, I trust them to come out. They were just at my house this week, helping me solve some problems. 803-672-3224. You can give them a call, talk to their friendly staff. Shout out to Justin Krantz, general manager. Since 1983, Krantz Cooling and Heating has been helping families like mine here in the Midlands with any HVAC needs. You can also go to their website, krantzcooling.com. That's Krantz with a K, cooling with a K. Since 1983, reliable, local service, krantzcooling.com.